Śrīmad Bhāgavatam of Krishna Dvaipayana Vyas. Translations and purports by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. 7th Canto, The Science of God, Chapter 14, Ideal Family Life. In this video, I will be reading the translations and purports for texts 34 through 42. This is the last section of the chapter, and in the table of contents is entitled, Everything Must Be Given to Krishna. Text 34. O King of the Earth, it has been decided by expert learned scholars that only the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, in whom all that is moving or non-moving within this universe is resting, and from whom everything is coming, is the best person to whom everything must be given. Purport. Whenever we perform some religious act in terms of dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, we must perform it according to the time, place, and person, kala, desha, patra. Narada Muni has already described the desha, place, and kala, time. The kala has been described in verses 20 through 24, beginning with the words ayane vishuve kuryad vyatipate dina kshaye. And the places for giving charity or performing ritualistic ceremonies have been described in verses 30 through 33, beginning with sarangsi pushkaradini kshetranyar ha sritanyuta. Now, to whom everything must be given is decided in this verse. Harir evaika urvisha yan mayang vai characharam. The Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna is the root of everything, and therefore he is the best patra or person to whom everything must be given. In Bhagavad Gita 5.29 it is said, Bhoktarang yagya tapasang sarvaloka maheshwaram suhridang sarvabhutanang gyatva mang shantim richchati. If one wants to enjoy real peace and prosperity, he should give everything to Krishna, who is the real enjoyer, real friend, and real proprietor. It is therefore said, Yata taror mula nishe chanena tripyanti tat skandha pujo pashakaha pran opaharachcha yatendriyanam tataiva sarvarhanam achyute jya. Śrīmad Bhāgavatam 4:31-14. By worshipping or satisfying Achyuta, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, one can satisfy everyone, just as one can water the branches, leaves, and flowers of a tree simply by watering its root, or as one satisfies all the senses of the body by giving food to the stomach. Therefore, a devotee simply offers everything to the Supreme Personality of Godhead to receive the best results of charity, religious performances, sense gratification, and even liberation. Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Text 35. O King Yudhishthir, the demigods, many great sages and saints, including even the 4 sons of Lord Brahma and I myself, were present at your Rajasuya sacrificial ceremony. But when there was a question of who should be the first person worshipped, everyone decided upon Lord Krishna, the Supreme Person. Purport. This is a reference to the Rajasuya sacrifice performed by Maharaj Yudhishthir. In that meeting, there was a great turmoil over selecting the best person to be worshipped first. Everyone decided to worship Sri Krishna. The only protest came from Shishupal, and because of his vehement opposition, he was killed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. 36. The entire universe, which is full of living entities, is like a tree whose root is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Achyuta, Krishna. Therefore, simply by worshipping Lord Krishna, one can worship all living entities. Purport. In Bhagavad Gita 10.8, the Lord says, Ahang sarvasya prabhavo mata sarvang pravartate iti matva bhajante mang buddha bhava samanvitaha. Quote, I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise, who perfectly know this, engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. Unquote. People are very much anxious to give service to other living entities, especially to the poor. But although they have manufactured many ways to give such help, actually they are expert in killing the poor living entities. This sort of service or mercy is not recommended in the Vedic wisdom. As stated in a previous verse, it has been decided, niruktam, by expert saintly persons, that Krishna is the root of everything, and that worshipping Krishna is worshipping everyone, just as supplying water to the root of a tree means satisfying all of its branches and twigs. Another point is that this universe is full of living entities from top to bottom on every planet. Jiva Rashi Bhir Akirnaha. Modern scientists and so-called scholars think that there are no living entities on planets other than this one. Recently they have said that they have gone to the moon and did not find any living entities there. But Śrīmad Bhāgavatam and the other Vedic literatures do not agree with this foolish conception. There are living entities everywhere, not only one or two, but Jiva Rashi Bihi, many millions of living entities. Even on the sun there are living entities, although it is a fiery planet. The chief living entity on the sun is called Vivashwan. Imang vivasvate yogang protavan aham avyayam. All the different planets are filled with different types of living entities according to different living conditions. To suggest that only this planet is filled with living entities and that others are vacant is foolish. This betrays a lack of real knowledge. Text 37. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has created many residential places, like the bodies of human beings, animals, birds, saints, and demigods. In all of these innumerable bodily forms, the Lord resides with the living being as Paramatma. Thus, he is known as the Purusha Avatar. Purport. In the Bhagavad Gita 1861, it is said, Ishvara sarva bhutanam hrid deshe arjuna tishtati brahmayan sarva bhutani yantra rudhani mayaya. Quote, the Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjun, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. Unquote. And in this book, there is a plate that corresponds with what I just read, and here it is. And the caption of this plate says, situated in everyone's heart, the Supreme Lord is directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. The living entity, who is part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, exists on the mercy of the Lord, who is always with him in any form of body. The living entity desires a particular type of material enjoyment, and thus the Lord supplies him with a body which is like a machine. Just to keep him alive in that body, the Lord remains with him as the Purusha, Kshirodakshay Vishnu. This is also confirmed in Brahma Samhita 535. Eko pyaso rachayitung jagadanda kotim yachchaktirasti jagadanda chayaya danta andantarasta paramanu chayantarastang govindamari purusham tamaham bhajami. Quote, I worship the personality of Godhead Govinda, who enters the existence of every universe and every atom by one of his plenary portions, and thus manifests his infinite energy throughout the material creation. Unquote. The living entity, being part and parcel of the Lord, is known as Jiva. The Supreme Lord Purusha remains with the Jiva to enable him to enjoy material facilities. Text 38. O King Yudhishthir, the Supersoul in every body gives intelligence to the individual soul according to his capacity for understanding. Therefore, the Supersoul is the chief within the body. The Supersoul is manifested to the individual soul according to the individual's comparative development of knowledge, austerity, penance, and so on. Purport. In Bhagavad Gita 15:15 it is said, Mata smritir jnanam apohanam cha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, in his localized aspect, gives intelligence to the individual soul as far as he is able to grasp it. Therefore, we find the individual soul in different high and low positions. A living entity with the body of a bird or beast cannot take instructions from the Supreme Soul as adequately as an advanced human being. Thus, there are gradations of bodily forms. In human society, the perfect Brahman is supposed to be the most advanced in spiritual consciousness, and further advanced than the Brahman is the Vaishnava. Therefore, the best persons are the Vaishnavas and Vishnu. When charity is to be given, one should take instruction from Bhagavad Gita 17:20. Datavyam iti yadhanam diyate nupakarine deshe kale chapatre cha tad danang satvikang smritam. Quote, that gift which is given out of duty at the proper time and place to a worthy person and without expectation of return is considered to be charity in the mode of goodness. Unquote. One should give charity to the Brahmins and Vaishnavas, for thus the Supreme Personality of Godhead will be worshipped. In this connection, Srila Madhvacharya comments, Brahmadi sta varan teshu na vishesho hare kvachit vyakti matra visheshana tarata myam vedanti cha. Beginning from Brahma down to the ant, everyone is conducted by the Supersoul, Ishvara Sarva Bhutanang Hridedesha Arjunatishtati. But because of a particular person's advancement in spiritual consciousness, he is considered to be important. Therefore, the Brahman Vaishnava is important, and above all, the Supersoul, the personality of Godhead, is the most important personality. Text 39. My dear King, when great sages and saintly persons saw mutually disrespectful dealings at the beginning of Treta Yuga, deity worship in the temple was introduced with all paraphernalia. Purport. As it is said in Śrīmad Bhāgavatam 12:3-52, Krite yad dhyayato vishnung tretayang yajato makai dvapare paricharyayang kalotad dhari kirtanat. Quote, whatever result one obtained in Satya Yuga by meditating on Vishnu, in Treta Yuga by performing sacrifices, and in Dwapara Yuga by serving the Lord's lotus feet, one can also obtain in Kali Yuga simply by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Unquote. In Satya Yuga, every person was spiritually advanced, and there was no envy between great personalities. Gradually, however, because of material contamination, with the advance of the ages, disrespectful dealings appeared even among Brahmins and Vaishnavas. Actually, an advanced Vaishnava is to be respected more than Vishnu, as stated in the Padma Purana. Aradhananang sarveshang Vishnor aradhanang param. Of all kinds of worship, worship of Lord Vishnu is the best. Tasmat paratarang devi tadiyanang samarchanam. And recommended more than worship of Vishnu is worship of the Vaishnava. Formerly, all activities were performed in connection with Vishnu, but after Satya Yuga there were symptoms of disrespectful dealings among Vaishnavas. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has said that a Vaishnava is he who has helped others become Vaishnavas. An example of one who has converted many others into Vaishnavas is Narada Muni. A powerful Vaishnava who has converted others into Vaishnavas is to be worshipped. But because of material contamination, sometimes such an exalted Vaishnava is disrespected by other minor Vaishnavas. When great saintly persons saw this contamination, they introduced worship of the deity in the temple. This began in Treta Yuga and was especially prominent in Dwapara Yuga. Dwapare paricharyayang. But in Kali Yuga, worship of the deity is being neglected. Therefore, chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra is more powerful than deity worship. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu set a practical example in that he did not establish any temples or deities, but he profusely introduced the Sankirtan movement. Therefore, Krishna consciousness preachers should give more stress to the Sankirtan movement, especially by distributing transcendental literature more and more. This helps the Sankirtan movement. Whenever there is a possibility to worship the deity, we may establish many centers, but generally we should give more stress to the distribution of transcendental literature. For this will be more effective in converting people to Krishna consciousness. It is said in Śrīmad Bhāgavatam 11:47, Archayang evaharaye pujang ya sradhaye pujang ya sradhaye hate natad bhakteshu chanyeshu sa bhakta prakrita smrita. Quote, a person who is very faithfully engaged in the worship of the deity in the temple, but does not know how to behave toward devotees or people in general, is called prakrita bhakta or kanishta adhikari. Unquote. A prakrita devotee or neophyte devotee is still on the material platform. He certainly engages in worshiping the deity, but he cannot appreciate the activities of a pure devotee. It has actually been seen that even an authorized devotee who is engaged in the service of the Lord by preaching the mission of Krishna consciousness is sometimes criticized by neophyte devotees. Such neophytes are described by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Sarva prani samananasamartanam avagya spardha matang tu bhagavat pratimaiva patram ityaha. For those who cannot properly appreciate the activities of authorized devotees, deity worship is the only way for spiritual advancement. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Antya 7:11, it is clearly said, Krishna Shakti Vina Nahe Tara Pravartana. Without being authorized by Krishna, one cannot preach the holy name of the Lord throughout the entire world. Nevertheless, a devotee who does so is criticized by neophyte devotees, kanishta adhikaris, who are on the lower stages of devotional service. For them, deity worship is strongly recommended. Text 40. Sometimes a neophyte devotee offers all the paraphernalia for worshiping the Lord, and he factually worships the Lord as the deity. But because he is envious of the authorized devotees of Lord Vishnu, the Lord is never satisfied with his devotional service. Purport. Deity worship is especially meant for purifying the neophyte devotees. Actually, however, preaching is more important. In Bhagavad Gita 18:69 it is said, Na cha tasman manesh yeshu kaschin me priyakritamaha. If one wants to be recognized by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he must preach the glories of the Lord. One who worships the deity must therefore be extremely respectful to preachers. Otherwise, simply worshipping the deity will keep one in the lower stage of devotion. Text 41. My dear King, of all persons, a qualified Brahmin must be accepted as the best within this material world, because such a Brahmin, by practicing austerity, Vedic studies, and satisfaction, becomes the counterpart body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport. From the Vedas we learn that the Personality of Godhead is the Supreme Person. Every living entity is an individual person, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the Supreme Person. A Brahmin who is well versed in Vedic knowledge and fully conversant with transcendental matters becomes a representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and therefore one should worship such a Brahmin or Vaishnava. A Vaishnava is superior to a Brahmin because whereas a Brahmin knows that he is Brahman, not matter, a Vaishnava knows that he is not only Brahman. A Vaishnava knows that he is not only Brahman, but also an eternal servant of the Supreme Brahman. Okay. I'm going to reread that because I'm not sure I read it correctly. A Vaishnava is superior to a Brahman because whereas a Brahman knows that he is Brahman, not matter, a Vaishnava knows that he is not only Brahman, but also an eternal servant of the Supreme Brahman. Therefore, worship of a Vaishnava is superior to worship of the deity in the temple. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, Sakshad Dharit Vena Samasta Shastrai. In all the scriptures, the spiritual master, who is the best of the Brahmins, the best of the Vaishnavas, is considered to be as good as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This does not mean, however, that the Vaishnava thinks himself God, for this is blasphemous. Although a Brahmin or Vaishnava is worshipped as being as good as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, such a devotee always remains a faithful servant of the Lord and never tries to enjoy the prestige that might accrue to him from being the Supreme Lord's representative. Text 42. My dear King Yudhishthir, the Brahmins, especially those engaged in preaching the glories of the Lord throughout the entire world, are recognized and worshipped by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the heart and soul of all creation. The Brahmins, by their preaching, sanctify the three worlds with the dust of their lotus feet, and thus they are worshipable even for Krishna. Purport. As admitted by Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita 1869, Nacha tasman manush yeshu kaschin me priya kritamaha. The Brahmins preach the cult of Krishna consciousness all around the world, and therefore, although they worship Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Lord also recognizes them as worshipable. The relationship is reciprocal. The Brahmins want to worship Krishna, and similarly, Krishna wants to worship the Brahmins. In conclusion, therefore, Brahmins and Vaishnavas who are engaged in preaching the glories of the Lord must be worshipped by religionists, philosophers, and people in general. At the Rajasuya Yagya of Maharaj Yudhishthir, many hundreds and thousands of Brahmins were present, yet Krishna was selected to be worshipped first. Therefore, Krishna is always the Supreme Person, but by his causeless mercy, he recognizes the Brahmins as dearmost to him. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 7th canto, 14th chapter of the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam entitled Ideal Family Life. Chapter 14, Ki Jai.